September 13th, 1882. The Egyptian desert, 2 hours before dawn. 13,000 British soldiers marched silently through complete darkness toward heavily fortified Egyptian positions. No lights, no talking, no smoking, just the sound of boots on sand and the distant barking of dogs in Egyptian camps. The men had been marching for hours, navigating by stars and compass alone, knowing that if they were discovered too early, the entire attack would collapse into chaos. At exactly 4:50 a.m., as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, British bugles sounded the charge. 13,000 men surged forward in a massive coordinated assault. The Egyptians, still sleeping in their trenches, scrambled to their guns. For 40 minutes, the desert erupted in the most concentrated violence of the entire campaign. This is the story of the Battle of Tel-el-Kebir, the night march and dawn assault that conquered a nation in less than an hour. The victory that demonstrated British tactical brilliance, professional execution, and the devastating effectiveness of surprise combined with overwhelming force, and the battle that established British dominance over Egypt for the next 70 years. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering the battle that conquered Egypt, the perfectly executed night attack, where British forces achieved total victory in 40 minutes through superior planning, discipline, and aggressive action. But before we get to that dawn assault, before we watch British infantry sweep through Egyptian fortifications in one of the most efficient victories in military history, we need to understand how Britain ended up invading Egypt and why this battle mattered so much to the British Empire. And if you're enjoying this, subscribe. We cover the battles where British forces demonstrated tactical excellence, the victories won through superior planning, professional execution, and decisive action. Egypt in 1882 was technically part of the Ottoman Empire, but in practice it had been virtually independent for decades under the rule of the Khedive, the hereditary viceroy who governed with considerable autonomy from Istanbul. The country was strategically vital because of one engineering marvel, the Suez Canal. Opened in 1869, this waterway, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, had transformed global trade and military strategy. Ships travelling from Britain to India could now take the Suez route instead of sailing around Africa, cutting journey times by thousands of miles. Britain had become the canal's primary user and had purchased a massive stake in the Suez Canal Company in 1875. The canal wasn't just economically important, it was the lifeline of the British Empire, the critical link between Britain and India. Any threat to the canal was a threat to British global power. By 1881, Egypt was experiencing serious financial and political crisis. The Khedive's government had borrowed heavily from European banks to finance modernisation projects and was now effectively bankrupt. European powers, particularly Britain and France, had imposed financial controls that gave foreign officials power over Egyptian revenue. Many Egyptians resented this foreign interference in their country's affairs. Enter Colonel Ahmed Urabi. He was an Egyptian army officer who'd risen from relatively modest origins, unusual in an officer corps traditionally dominated by Turkish-Egyptian elite families. Urabi became the leader of a nationalist movement that demanded Egypt for Egyptians, protesting foreign control and the Khedive's subservience to European powers. His movement combined military discontent with broader nationalist sentiment. Egyptian soldiers rallied to him. Much of the Egyptian population supported his cause. By early 1882, Urabi effectively controlled Egypt's government and military. The Khedive was reduced to a figurehead. European residents in Egypt felt increasingly threatened. Then in June 1882, riots broke out in Alexandria. European residents were attacked. Dozens were killed. The situation spiraled toward complete chaos. Britain decided military intervention was necessary. French cooperation was expected. France had equal interest in the canal. But at the last moment, the French government declined to participate. Britain would act alone. The decision was driven by strategic calculation. The Suez Canal had to be secured, European lives had to be protected, and British global power depended on maintaining control of the Egyptian route to India. Admiral Sir Beauchamp Seymour's fleet bombarded Alexandria's forts in July, suppressing Egyptian coastal defences. British forces occupied Alexandria and established a base for further operations. But Urabi's main army, approximately 38,000 men, remained intact in defensive positions, protecting Cairo and the canal. To truly secure Egypt, British forces would need to defeat Urabi's army decisively. Lieutenant General Sir Garnet Wolseley was given command of the British expedition. Wolseley was 59 years old and one of Britain's most experienced colonial commanders. He'd fought in Burma, the Crimea, the Indian Mutiny, China, and multiple campaigns in Africa. He'd commanded the Red River expedition in Canada and the Ashanti War in West Africa. He'd earned his reputation through consistent success in difficult colonial campaigns. Wolseley believed in thorough preparation, surprise when possible, and aggressive execution once committed to battle. Wolseley assembled approximately 13,000 British and Indian troops, a relatively small force for conquering a country, but highly professional and well-equipped. These weren't hastily raised militia. They were regular army battalions with professional officers, trained NCOs, and soldiers who understood their trade. British infantry carried Martini Henry rifles, breech-loading single-shot rifles far superior to the older weapons many Egyptian soldiers used. British artillery was handled by skilled crews who could deliver accurate rapid fire. The strategic situation was this: Urabi's army held strong defensive positions along the Sweetwater Canal, the freshwater canal that ran from the Nile to the Suez Canal, the water supply for the entire region. Urabi had concentrated his forces at Tel-el-Kebir, a position astride the railway and the canal, with extensive earthwork fortifications, trenches, and artillery positions. If Wolseley attacked these fortifications in daylight with frontal assaults, British casualties would be heavy and success uncertain. Egyptian forces might not match British professional soldiers in training, but they had numerical superiority and strong defensive positions. Wolseley decided on something audacious: a night march followed by a dawn assault. His entire army would march through darkness, navigating by compass and stars, approaching to within assault distance of Egyptian fortifications without being detected. Then at dawn they would launch a coordinated surprise attack before Egyptian forces could fully man their defences. This plan required extraordinary execution. Marching 13,000 men silently through darkness across unfamiliar terrain toward enemy positions, any mistake could lead to disaster. If Egyptian scouts discovered the approach, Urabi's entire army would be alert and ready, negating surprise. If British units lost direction in darkness, the coordinated assault would collapse into confusion. Success demanded perfect navigation, absolute silence, and flawless timing. Wolseley spent days reconnoitring Egyptian positions, studying the terrain, and planning every detail. He established the exact route his divisions would take. He calculated march times and distances. He coordinated with his brigade commanders to ensure everyone understood the plan. Nothing was left to chance that could be controlled through preparation. On the night of September 12th, 13, British forces began their march. The infantry advanced in massive columns through complete darkness. Officers navigated by compass. Guides who'd studied the terrain led the way. Strict orders, absolute silence. No lights, no smoking. Anyone making noise would be severely punished. The men understood the stakes. Surprise meant victory with minimal casualties. Discovery meant bloody frontal assault against prepared defences. The march was grueling. 7 miles across desert terrain in darkness, maintaining formation and direction without lights. Men stumbled. Units occasionally drifted off course and had to be corrected. But British discipline held. The columns maintained their advance. Egyptian pickets heard distant sounds, but couldn't determine what was happening in the darkness. By 4:30 a.m, British forces were in assault positions just hundreds of yards from Egyptian trenches. Wolseley had timed everything perfectly. Dawn would break around 5 a.m. He wanted his assault to begin just as light appeared, late enough that men could see their objectives, early enough that Egyptians would still be mostly asleep. At 4:50 a.m, with the eastern sky just beginning to brighten, British bugles sounded the charge across the entire front. 13,000 men surged forward in a massive coordinated assault. The Highland Brigade, Scottish regiments whose soldiers had proven themselves in countless colonial battles, charged the Egyptian left flank. The Guards Brigade and line infantry battalions assaulted the centre. Indian brigades struck the right. The entire attack launched simultaneously across miles of front. Egyptian soldiers, woken by the sudden bugle calls and the sound of thousands of men charging, scrambled from their tents and dugouts. Officers shouted orders, artillerymen ran to their guns. Infantry grabbed rifles and rushed to defensive positions. But there was no time. British soldiers were already at the trenches, already climbing over earthworks, already firing volleys into the confused mass of Egyptian defenders. The fighting was intense, but brief. Egyptian soldiers who reached their positions fought with courage. They stood and fired. They attempted to hold their trenches. But British infantry had momentum and surprise. Highlanders charged with bayonets fixed, their distinctive war cries terrifying Egyptian defenders. Guards battalions advanced with parade ground precision, even in combat. Line infantry delivered devastating volley fire at close range before charging home with cold steel. Egyptian artillery tried to respond. Guns fired into the attacking British columns. But British artillery had advanced with the infantry and immediately began counter-battery fire. British gunners, trained professionals who'd practiced their craft for years, suppressed Egyptian batteries with accurate rapid fire. Within minutes, Egyptian artillery was silenced or abandoned as crews fled the assault. The Highland Brigade broke through the Egyptian left almost immediately. Scottish soldiers, veterans of previous campaigns, knew exactly what to do: suppress resistance with rifle fire, charge with bayonets, and keep moving forward to prevent defenders from reorganising. They swept through Egyptian positions, capturing guns and taking hundreds of prisoners. In the centre, the Guards Brigade demonstrated the relentless professionalism that made British Guards regiments legendary. They advanced in line formation even under fire, maintaining perfect alignment, delivering volleys with mechanical efficiency. Egyptian defenders who stood to fight were cut down by concentrated rifle fire. Those who attempted to flee were overtaken by the Guards' disciplined advance. On the right flank, Indian brigades, sepoy regiments with British officers, soldiers from India who'd proven their loyalty and effectiveness countless times, performed equally well. They assaulted Egyptian positions with the same aggressive spirit as British troops, demonstrating that the British Indian Army was a formidable fighting force. Urabi's army collapsed. Once the initial defensive line broke, there was no secondary position to fall back to. Egyptian soldiers who'd fought bravely at their posts realised the battle was lost and began retreating. The retreat quickly became a rout. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers fled toward Cairo, abandoning weapons, artillery, supplies, everything that would slow their escape. British cavalry pursued relentlessly, cutting down stragglers and capturing additional prisoners. By 5:30 a.m, 40 minutes after the assault began, the Battle of Tel-el-Kebir was over. Egyptian fortifications were in British hands. Urabi's army was shattered and fleeing. The road to Cairo lay open. British casualties were remarkably light, fewer than 500 killed and wounded from a force of 13,000. Egyptian casualties were much heavier. Estimates range from 2,000 to 4,000 killed, wounded, or captured, plus all their artillery and equipment lost. Wolseley's victory was absolute and decisive. He'd achieved exactly what he'd planned: surprise dawn assault, coordinated attack, rapid breakthrough, and complete defeat of enemy forces with minimal friendly casualties. The battle was a textbook example of how superior planning, professional execution, and aggressive tactics could achieve overwhelming victory even against numerically superior forces in strong defensive positions. British forces immediately advanced toward Cairo. There was no organised resistance. Urabi's remaining forces were too demoralised and scattered to offer further opposition. On September 14th, one day after Tel-el-Kebir, British cavalry entered Cairo. Urabi surrendered. The nationalist movement collapsed. Within 2 days of the battle, Britain controlled Egypt. The strategic consequences were enormous. British occupation of Egypt, initially intended as temporary, would last until 1956. 74 years of British presence and control. Egypt became a protectorate in all but name. British advisors controlled Egyptian government departments. British forces garrisoned key positions. The Suez Canal was secured absolutely. The route to India was guaranteed. British global power was enhanced. For Britain, Tel-el-Kebir demonstrated something important about late Victorian military capability. This wasn't a desperate struggle against overwhelming odds. This was professional military force, properly equipped and expertly commanded, achieving decisive victory through superior tactics and execution. The British Army of the 1880s had learned from decades of colonial warfare. They understood logistics, reconnaissance and combined arms tactics. They could plan complex operations and execute them with precision. The 40-minute battle itself was brutal efficiency. From the moment bugles sounded to the moment Egyptian positions were overrun, British forces executed their assault with devastating effectiveness. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no breakdown in command and control. Every unit knew its objective and accomplished it. The attack achieved complete surprise and maintained momentum throughout. For Egypt, Tel-el-Kebir was a national catastrophe wrapped in a brief battle. Arabi's nationalist movement, which had promised to free Egypt from foreign control, instead brought foreign occupation. The Egyptian army was humiliated. British forces occupied the country and would remain for generations. Egyptian independence was postponed for decades. The battle also affected British imperial strategy long term. Occupation of Egypt gave Britain control of the Suez Canal, an unprecedented influence in the Middle East. British forces in Egypt could project power into Sudan, Palestine, and throughout the region. The occupation complicated British relations with other European powers who resented British unilateral action. But strategically, controlling Egypt was an enormous advantage for British global power. The Battle of Tel-el-Kebir represents a particular kind of Victorian military achievement. Not the desperate last stands like Rorke's Drift, not the massive set-piece battles like Waterloo, but the efficient, professional, decisive victory achieved through superior planning and execution. Wolseley identified the correct strategy: night march and dawn assault. He planned meticulously, he commanded professionally, his forces executed flawlessly. The result was total victory with minimal casualties. For British military history, Tel-el-Kebir demonstrated that the lessons of colonial warfare had been learned well. The British Army of the 1880s could plan complex operations, march through difficult conditions, maintain discipline in challenging circumstances, and deliver decisive combat power at the critical moment. These capabilities came from professional military training, experienced officers, and soldiers who understood their trade. The battle also showed British ability to operate far from home with logistical efficiency. Wolseley's force was supplied, equipped, and supported through an extended campaign in a foreign country. British logistics worked. British medical services cared for wounded. British organisation enabled operations that other armies might have struggled to accomplish. Imperial power required not just combat effectiveness, but the entire apparatus of military administration. Britain had developed both. The immediate aftermath of Tel-el-Kebir revealed just how complete British victory had been. Egyptian forces simply ceased to exist as an organised military threat. Arabi's 38,000-man army was scattered, demoralised, and disarmed. The nationalist movement that had controlled Egypt for over a year collapsed within 48 hours. British cavalry patrols encountered no resistance as they advanced toward Cairo. The speed of Egyptian collapse demonstrated that Tel-el-Kebir hadn't just been a tactical victory, it had been a psychological crushing of Egyptian military capability. British occupation of Egypt transformed regional dynamics. The Khedive was restored to nominal authority, but everyone understood where real power lay. British advisors took control of key government ministries. Sir Evelyn Baring, later Lord Cromer, became the British Consul General and effective ruler of Egypt for the next quarter century. Under British control, Egypt's finances were reorganised, its administration modernised, and its military rebuilt. This time under British supervision, with British officers commanding Egyptian units. The Suez Canal security was absolutely guaranteed. British forces garrisoned the canal zone. British warships patrolled Egyptian waters. No threat to this vital waterway could materialise without British knowledge and response. The route to India, the lifeline of the British Empire, was secure. Ships travelling from Britain to the subcontinent passed through waters Britain now controlled at both ends. This strategic advantage was incalculable. British control of Egypt also enabled further imperial expansion. From Egyptian bases, British forces could project power into Sudan, eventually leading to the reconquest of that territory in the 1890s. British influence extended throughout the Red Sea region. The British position in East Africa was strengthened. Egypt became the linchpin of British Middle Eastern strategy, a position it would hold until the mid-20th century. For the soldiers who fought at Tel-el-Kebir, the battle became a source of unit pride. Highland regiments added another battle honour to their distinguished records. Guards battalions demonstrated why they were considered the finest infantry in the British Army. Indian regiments proved their loyalty and effectiveness. Every unit that participated could point to Tel-el-Kebir as an example of military excellence. British treatment of defeated Egyptians was relatively moderate. Urabi's death sentence was commuted to exile. Egyptian soldiers were disarmed and sent home. British policy aimed to control Egypt, not destroy it. This restrained approach helped stabilise British rule and reduced ongoing resistance. The battle's legacy extended well beyond 1882. British presence in Egypt shaped Middle Eastern politics for generations. During World War I, Egypt served as a crucial British base for operations against the Ottoman Empire. British forces used Egyptian facilities to supply campaigns in Palestine and Mesopotamia. The strategic position Wolseley secured in 1882 paid dividends decades later, when global conflict required British power projection in the region. If this is the kind of military history that interests you, battles won through tactical brilliance, victories achieved with minimal casualties through superior planning, moments when professional military forces demonstrated their capabilities, then you know what to do. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered. These are the examples of military excellence that still teach valuable lessons about the importance of preparation, discipline, and decisive action. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The battles that proved British tactical brilliance and professional excellence told the way they deserve to be told.